Okay. And with that, we'll begin with a prayer and get started. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, we ask you to protect this internet, the Zoom, every part of it that keeps us from being able to communicate with each other. We ask you to open our hearts, open our minds, open our ears to some new information, and that it may be formative for us as we continue to work with our parishes, with our dioceses, and think about how exactly do we share the gospel with a generation that has so many things working against it in this regard. But we know that the gospel breaks through all of these hard places and brings people to a place of light and peace. So, Lord, help us to be better at that. In your name we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. So, why should churches respond to, or how should they respond to why religion went obsolete? Yeah. All right. If you don't know Christian Smith, a really well known sociologist out of the University of Notre Dame, and has done a number of important works, especially around youth and sociology of religion up to this point. But this is a little bit broader. It is a big book. It's actually hard to summarize. I don't know how many of you have read this. If you could perhaps put in the chat if you have, that would be great to know. But I'm going to try to just sort of pull out what I consider to be some of the most important points, which is not to say there aren't other ones. So I encourage you to do some reading this summer. But as Smith says himself, it's depressing reading. He does. He says, like, well, enjoy. This will be fun. Because he does say some new things that are important. It's also, if you're a person who loves God and loves the church, just kind of hard to read. There's a lot going on that is not good news, honestly, for our churches, but does help us understand the mission field better and helps us understand, what we're up against and maybe some clues as to how to meet people where they're at. So let's begin with some presumptions that this book makes right from the very get-go. All right. The book explores whether traditional religion serves a cultural function among 25 to 59-year-olds. Most of the time, Smith is going to call these people post-boomers because that is basically who they are. Later on in the book, he's going to talk a great deal about something that he calls the Millennial Zeitgeist. And yes, millennials are a large part of this, but so are Gen Xers, and so are the older folks within Gen Z. So really, everybody who's not a boomer, all right? He's going to say the boomer generation has a fundamentally different set of cultural assumptions than, frankly, everybody else in the United States. But these are still people who are in leadership. They still have a lot of numbers because they are such a large generation. So we don't feel it as keenly as we will fairly soon. Okay, so focusing on Gen Z to Gen X. Obsolescence. When he's talking about the word obsolescence, he's not talking about whether something is true or not, because you could read this as why religion went obsolete and things like, oh, is he saying something about religion is suddenly untrue? He's like, no, it's not what I'm focusing on at all. It's like, I'm focusing on whether it is a functional option in a given culture, right? Okay, so obsolescence just refers to, is it being chosen, or have people decided to use something else for that particular need? For example, listening to music, 8-track tapes are obsolete right now. Do they work? Sure, they do. They work just fine, but nobody uses them. We stream our music on digital platforms now. And he's going to say, unfortunately, in many ways, for many, many people in the United States, institutional religion has become obsolete. Okay, yeah, that's a hard one to swallow. Smith is only talking about religious practices in the United States. Okay, we could be talking about the Western world. There's some overlap, and I will talk about that because I think there's actually a lot of hope that I'm going to sort of put as a foil against this. but he is talking about the United States in particular, and by religion, he is referring to three institutional religions: institutional Judaism, Christianity, and the Church of the Latter-day Saints, the Mormons, because they are the traditional religious options in the American context. He says, I know, and we considered that you could talk about institutional religions that are other, like Islam, right? Or Hinduism or Buddhism. And he says, like, I'm not considering those within a U.S. context because he doesn't consider it to be part of the historical narrative up to this point. So it's like, you need to make decisions. That's the decision we made. Okay, so those are some presumptions. Yeah. And the answer, or rather the question that they're trying to answer, is why the skyrocketing rise of the nuns? I mean, no news to anybody here at this point. The people who are choosing disaffiliated has gone up and up and up for many years at this point. Appears to be leveling off. It might even be going down, but there's a long way to go from where we were, that's for sure. So just to give you an example, there's the Pew Research numbers from 2007 to 2023. That goes across all US generations. If you actually scaled that more for Generation Z or even Generation Z and millennials, the climb would be much, much steeper. They are the ones who are more religiously disaffiliated than the older generations. But Smith is arguing we really haven't gotten a good answer as to why. It's like lots of ideas out there, and there is one predominant answer, but he's not convinced. And let's go ahead and get to that. His answer, his thesis as to the why the rise of the nuns, is that he's going to say, well, people say secularism. It's like, but secularism does not perfectly explain the spiritual life of the nuns. It does not perfectly explain why the nuns chose to basically opt out. Okay, to just say, I just don't belong to any religion, right? All right, that's part one of his thesis, but let's unpack that a little bit. Secularism is maybe not the be all end all of the story here. So he's going against a standard argument in sociology over the past 100 years that was sort of most articulated by Max Weber, German sociologist, who used this phrase, the disenchantment of the world, in the early 1900s. Okay, and for the next 100 years, the Western world, as we understand it, really clung to that phrase. Now, what it means is Weber was saying, it's like, look, with the increasing embrace of the secular worldview, we are increasingly disenchanted with mysticism and mystery and sacramentalism and anything transcendent, that meaning is beyond what we see and what we touch in the physical world. Weber called that the disenchantment of the world, where mystery began to be seen in the Western world as something akin to a fairy tale that people learned when they were small children and they grew out of. It's not real. Okay, it's not real. And Weber argued, sociologically, it appeared to be the case that people were going to continue to embrace secularism, and religion, especially as it's understood as mystery, as sacramentalism, as transcendence, was going to increasingly be put aside. And a lot of things have happened that make that argument hold water, honestly, right? We have seen an increasing distance from the understanding of God as mystery over about 100 years. But now Christian Smith is here, and he's going, well, but 100 years later, he says he's uncovered data that says America is not really there. Some parts of the Western world are. They embraced secularism and moved to its logical conclusion, which was atheism. Okay? However, Smith says most people in the United States, yes, I mean, we are an increasingly secular nation, but people are really not dropping their desire for the transcendence, their desire for mystery, their desire for some kind of understanding of sacramentalism. However, they're not connected to institutional religion. Okay, so we get a lot of people who are, very interested in picking up, sort of buying, for lack of a better term, uh, buying their transcendent moments, right? And these could be through particular physical articles, some kind of talisman, like, and I mean, Christianity, particularly Catholicism, has plenty of these things because we have a deep sacramental tradition, with relics, right? And with scapulars and things like that. All right, well, it's entirely possible that somebody could pick one of those up and say, this is really, really cool, but just not buy any of the rest of what comes with it. I mean, it's detached from the understanding in which it was born, and that is, that this is meant to be a sign of God's presence in the world. Yeah, I could go more into it, but I don't need to convince you all. You all understand it. Smith is saying the nuns do not. But in general, they're not going for these types of um, moments of the spirit that are connected to institutional religion. Instead, I hate to use the most obvious and sort of maybe obnoxious example of this, but they're going to Etsy and getting an Etsy witch to create a blessing for them and buying it. I'm not kidding. These things exist if you wanted to go find it. They're doing things like that, or they're going to other religious traditions that are considered to be foreign to them, and they're picking and choosing a little bit. It's kind of like, oh, well, maybe there actually is something to the salutation to the sun god in my yoga class at the same time as I sort of really appreciate, the solstice, the way that the Ojibwe understand it. It's a mishmash, is what Smith is saying. And the only thing that's really in common is they're not jettisoning the mystery. This is significant, to be perfectly honest, and it's also maybe a different situation than the one that we've put our heads around here. So let's build up to how we got here and what we can possibly do with this. Okay. He spent some time in this book talking about the perfect storm. The perfect storm just brewed. It really brewed. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave that up there. You can go ahead and read this if you're not driving or something like that. But a number of things happened in the past 50, 75 years or so that he says just really fundamentally changed the way that cultures function, right? The values that we have, the what we do and when we do it, what is expected in terms of a human life, and when you're going to engage in certain, rites of passage, what even is a rite of passage anymore, things like that. He says a number of things changed very quickly. The deinstitutionalization of marriage and family is actually a huge one. Okay, he's not talking in terms of moral things, he's talking as a sociologist, but he's going to say, look, it used to be actually fairly simple, that people would grow up when they got into perhaps their 20s, maybe even a little younger. They would go to school and get married, or maybe they would just simply go directly to getting married. And then the two of them would raise a family, and they'd do the same thing over and over again. I, you know, there were people who went off that path for sure, but that was the path. Okay. And you got off the path or you stayed on the path. And he's going to say, now there is no path. There really is no path. Some people get married, some people don't. Some people live together, some people stay single forever and ever and ever. And this has always been the case, but I mean, it's increasingly the case where people are just really not choosing well into their 30s and even early 40s. That's just simply not the way that it used to be. And it changes a number of things in terms of religion and what its role is within a human life, because it used to be very common and staid and expected, Not so much now. Lots of other things too. Shift in the world order for sure. We're not really consumed with the Cold War and the memory of World War II. Now it's really a very different situation and even more volatile than when he finished writing this particular book. The rise of the religious right combined with this fascination in Eastern religions and a loss of transcendent language in our everyday language, these three things all kind of really reinforced each other in some weird ways, even though they're all very different from each other. That had a big impact on how religion was viewed from people who were sort of marginal to religious practice. Um, Religious self-destruction, okay, is one of the pieces there. And, within the Catholic Church, we're really talking about the sex abuse scandal most prominently, but there were other scandals in other religions in the United States as well. But again, for people who were sort of on the margins, this is what they saw when they saw religion. Okay, multicultural education and identity politics. Um, there are good reasons, honestly, behind actually both of those things, but it did remove the whole reality of a common narrative. And that, again, changes the way we think about where does religion fit into this. In the background of all this, the rise of the nuns continues. People continue to opt out, and it becomes normal to be a nun, right? It becomes normal to say, I'm not religious. At one point, not too long ago, that would have been really abnormal. That would have been really abnormal, but it's not now. Okay, so we've got the history, but now we have this culture. And he spends a whole chapter, which, if you don't read the whole book, I would really encourage you finding the book and reading this chapter. It kind of encapsulates a lot of what he says that's really new. And he calls it the Millennial Zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is a German word that means the spirit of the age. And he says, now, to all the sociologists who are reading this, that's not me, but but to all the sociologists, like, I know you don't like the word zeitgeist because zeitgeist is not measurable. It's like, on the other hand, it's like, I'm going to make a case for it because sometimes there is a zeitgeist. That is, there is a cultural mood, for lack of a better phrase, that is really so strong at a particular moment in time that it really has an outsized impact on how people think. And he gives the correlating example of the Roaring Twenties. I don't know what they're going to call the 20s this time around, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we started the pandemic and yeah, we still have half a decade practically to go, and it's not been great. They're going to call it something, but I'm talking about the 1920s, okay, the Roaring Twenties. Um, he's going to say, look, that was really encapsulated in many ways by The Great Gatsby, which is a complete failure as a book at the time that it was released, and now is seen as a classic of American literature. You really see what the culture was like at that time, at least in a particular portion of the United States, what the values were and how people operated and all of that. He's going to say it's not the same zeitgeist. It's like, but the Roaring Twenties zeitgeist had a really outsized impact on how people understood each other, and it accelerated some things and stopped other movements dead in their tracks and what have you. Okay, so we've got this zeitgeist, okay? We're going to try to describe this. He says, really, we're talking about a cultural model of operating presumptions. And that picture that I have there is a plexius. So it's a sphere that has all kinds of points on it. Smith is going to make 35 points, and I'm not going to go over all of them, trust me. But he makes 35 points of what makes up the millennial zeitgeist. And he's going to say, the thing is not that any one of these points really dominates over the other. Some are a little stronger than others, but they're more equal than not. He says, the reason it's strong is that they all really reinforce each other, okay? And reinforce each other in the way that they're connected like a sphere. And it's hard when you're caught in the millennial zeitgeist to really imagine a life outside of the sphere. And guess what? The life outside of the sphere is something more akin to the Christian worldview. That is what is making it hard. But let's talk a little bit about what this cultural zeitgeist is. And he calls it millennial, but he's including Gen X as well as the more adult Gen Zers as well. He's going to say they're going to be more in common than not on this. Okay, so this is 2 slides. This first slide, I'm just talking about points he makes that really don't have to do explicitly with religion, even though some of them are pretty close. The ones that are in yellow on this screen are related to each other rather strongly, and I think really key. They're really the most key of all the bunch. And it is about the human individual. Okay, the first one says that each individual possesses a distinctive selfhood that they need to discover. Smith says that basically he created all of these focus groups and lots of interviews where he asked people to just describe their life and what they believed and their values and that sort of thing, and then collated all of that from across the United States to sort of boil it down into different trends and themes that he was seeing there. This is one of them. Each individual possesses a distinctive selfhood that they need to discover. Okay. That doesn't sound so crazy, to be perfectly honest, but the Millennial Zeitgeist, he says, tends to take it to a real extreme. It's like, this is the point of life, is to discover your uniqueness, okay? To name it and to embrace it. And it's going to be different from everyone else's, period. Okay, so neglecting one's unique selfhood is irresponsible, right? This really is like your goal in life. This is why you exist. This is why you exist, is to really discover and embrace your unique selfhood. And growing up means becoming one's own person. They're all really related here. Now, there are ways to talk about this, within a Catholic worldview, but really, the next ones really mitigate against that. You go into the blue section. Social institutions are inherently impersonal and corrupted by money and power. Very, very anti-institutional. This entire worldview. It's anti-institutional. And of course, there's something to this. They can be rather impersonal. They can be corrupted by money and power. The problem here is that any person or institution's claim to possess truth is indefensible or unacceptable, according to this worldview. Like, who are they to say that they know what the truth is? Who are they to say that they have the authority to tell me in my own distinct, unique selfhood what I should believe? Okay, so there's a radical leveling of the playing field as to where you find truth. And institutions are already, not trusted. In addition to all that, sort of related, there is overwhelming information on absolutely everything right now. We are in the information age plus, 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 and decisions in situations like that are really based on our gut. Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? They're really based on our gut because there's too much to really assimilate. We can't take it all in. So you don't trust institutions to tell you the truth, but you also can't really handle all this information for yourself. So you go with your gut in order to define your own unique selfhood. Now, in the background of all this, it's also pretty bleak. Okay, there's no American dream, according to this zeitgeist. It's economically a very bleak future. There is an understanding of the sacred, but it tends to be in the immanent. It tends to be in the physical. It's almost like you can trust physical articles more than you can churches, right? And the possibility of tradition as any form of guidance is really almost inconceivable to people who are really embracing the millennial zeitgeist. They had a really hard time even trying to define what tradition was. I mean, more than one apparently said something. Isn't it like that Fiddler on the Roof song? I'm kind of surprised they knew what Fiddler on the Roof was, but I mean, they couldn't define it. They could not define what tradition was because very much in the present, this whole group is. And of course, you only live once and the fear of missing out. So they're kind of related, but it's very present focused. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. Focus on the now. It's all you have. Okay. So that's the stuff that doesn't have to do with religion. Now let's go ahead and look at some of the points that do have to do with religion. None of them are positive. I'm going to be honest, that none of them are positive. Religion is a personal opinion, according to the Millennial Zeitgeist. Truth is frankly not the point, because who can know what that is, right? I mean, for me as an individual, okay, that's what makes it an opinion, though, right? So pervasively, religion is understood as a personal opinion. And that means that if religion works for them, other people, well, good for you. You be you, you may have heard, right? But don't bother others about it because it's very individual. It's very personal. It's like, who are you to say what I should believe? And it's not necessary to be well informed about religion to dismiss it. Um, this is not just religion, right? But there are so many quotes that just, as a former college professor, just, made me want to cry in my sleep, honestly, about deep misunderstandings of Christianity. And, it's like, yeah, well, and then just admitting, it's like, well, actually, I don't know that for sure, but other people have said that, so it must be true. Okay, good times. A few more. Religion helps people be good and provide community. But it's not necessary to either of those things. I mean, you could be good without religion. You could find a community without religion, but if that's your sort of thing, fine. So religion's value ends up being very in the moment, very imminent, and very instrumental. It's a means to community. It's a means to learning how to be good. And as far as that goes, people are going to say in this zeitgeist, okay, good. Uh, but, and it's a big but, religion is also an institution, and therefore it is dangerous inherently to self-expression. And the whole point of the millennial zeitgeist is you have this duty almost to really self-express, to really find your unique personhood, your unique selfhood, and to live that out. So religion's not a help there, and in fact can really hold you back, according to the zeitgeist. The burden is on churches to attract. There's no sense of, it's like, boy, I should really figure out whether this stuff is true for myself. Hypocrisy is damning. Of course it is, right? There's lots of prophets within our own scriptures who have a lot of things to say about hypocrisy, and none of them are good. Hypocrisy is, pretty much hated by God, yes. But it does point to something else about the zeitgeist, and that is there is no mercy in the zeitgeist. There just simply is not. There is no mercy. There is no redemption in this zeitgeist. Hypocrisy is a form of sin. And hypocrisy is damning, sin is damning. There's no way out of that in this particular cultural milieu, other than to go shopping around for a different understanding of mystery that you can literally hold on to in your hands. Okay, and drifting in and out of community is really pretty normative. I mean, commitment is just not a thing. Finally, alternative ways of thinking about religion. Okay, novel fringe beliefs are appealing, mainstream beliefs are not. So Smith is going to argue that there's this thing going on that he calls the re-enchantment of America, and that is the nuns are not becoming atheists. Okay, they just aren't. A few are, but I mean, really, most overwhelmingly are not. but they are trying to get their spiritual needs met through this hodgepodge of spiritual practices and talismans that are really unconnected to a broader worldview, um, and certainly not connected to anything that looks like a religious institution. Okay, well, I'm going to just sort of fly through this one because I'd really like to get to the positive pieces here so you're not completely depressed for the rest of the week. But they do have explanations for leaving religion, and they are really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right on down the line there. They just happen to clump nicely into, they have ideological reasons, they have habit reasons, they have personal hurt reasons. About hypocrisy, about institutions, and we need to be personal. It's about a personal journey. I just drifted away. None of those should be surprising to us. I mean, other people have said this as well, but his new data affirms that, let's say. Okay, so that's why people leave. Now, let's look at something. Okay, I'm moving away now from why religion went obsolete, but I am moving into how should churches respond. Okay, the thing is, Smith did this work and published this in 2025. Okay, the work was done in 2023 and 2024. And now we're in 2026, and in the past couple of years, something is changing here. Okay, some of you may have heard of something called the Quiet Revival, and the people, I know a lot of people don't like that phrase, and I don't really myself either, but if you've heard of it, this is where I'm going, okay? This is where I'm going. It refers to a number of things. One of them is that OCIA numbers, people being received into the church, being baptized, they are going up, and it's across almost all dioceses in the United States. And I think significantly, we're not sure why. We're not sure why. I mean, people have some ideas, but a lot of people don't even have that. Just all of a sudden, these numbers started going up. And the numbers are even more significantly going up in Europe. So I was recently in London. I was at the Alpha Global Leadership Conference, and before that, with some people talking to people in England, particularly in London, about this thing that was called by a group called the World Bible Society, the Quiet Revival. Now, the numbers that I'm showing you right here have been questioned at minimum, okay? So take it with a grain of salt, but I need to begin at the beginning, right? Okay, and this was in 2025. They're noticing that the numbers that are being recorded by the government of Great Britain are really shooting up in terms of religious affiliation, particularly in fact, almost entirely with Christianity. England is actually one of the most secular countries on earth. In fact, it's the fifth most secular country on earth. Maybe surprising to you, but I mean, seriously, we're talking like after China and North Korea. So that tells you something about where England has been. And the number of atheists was incredibly high, even only like 6 or 7 years ago. By that, I mean like 40%. That's a lot of people claiming atheism. They have a slightly different history of the past 25 years that may point to that. But, they had like around 40%, give or take a couple, claiming atheism, and another maybe 20% claiming Christianity, and a lot of other things in between. Okay, that, I'm not kidding, flipped according to these numbers in the last 2 years, which made some people who saw that do a double take, a triple take, and then say, what is going on here? Well, one thing that might have been going on there was this was an opt-in survey rather than a randomized survey. So the data was not perfect. It's not like the data that you would get from Pew in the United States or something like that. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that the data is not as trustworthy as if it were a randomized survey. But when you talk to the pastors and the vicars that, are in England, they're saying it's like, look, there is no question that there is a revival going on here. We have people, especially people in their 20s, that are literally coming into our churches off the street and saying, I had this dream last night. Can you tell me what it means? There was this man, and he seemed to be dying, and he was on something that looked like a T. I'm not kidding you all. It's like, I mean, this is the level of Christianity that was in England where people did not even recognize really super common Christian images and were able to articulate them very well. Right. But they knew it's like, I think this is a Christian thing. So they went into a church. It's like, can you explain this dream to me? And they keep saying, it's like, this is actually getting to be really crazy common, to be honest, where people are coming in off the streets like, I was walking by, the Tims and I had this sudden image of something. And they're saying it's like, this is a move of God. Okay, we don't know how to, we can't explain this other than God is acting in the hearts of these young people who were raised by atheist parents and really encouraging them to walk into a church and ask some questions. And they're staying, okay? So I can go into a lot of things that I heard there because they were all pretty darn amazing. But the numbers there are not clear, okay? The numbers are not clear. They're up. We don't know what exactly they are. All right. That makes you wonder, doesn't it? Okay, but our friend Christian Smith is talking about the United States. He's not talking about Britain. He is working with an American context, an American recent history. And he says, look, or if he doesn't say this, but I'm saying this, we do have, some numbers here that are not as dramatic as the ones that they saw in England, but they are real. Okay, here you want to see the numbers going down rather than up because they are measuring people who are claiming they have no religious affiliation. Okay, well, there you go. We've got all these people, the silent generation, the boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z. All those numbers are going down, with the possible exception of the millennials, and that goes down, but only by a point. So it's really more of a plateau. But there's movement, whereas before there was just going up and up and up and up and up. And this has happened a couple of years in a row that makes you think this is not a one-off. All right, so what is going on here? What is going on here? Is there something where Smith is working with this understanding that religion has become, at least institutionally, obsolete, and yet maybe the people who are in Europe, particularly in Britain, but there are stories about they're very similar in France as well, have bottomed out to a certain level where institutional religion is new again. Are we really seeing the very first fruits of that ourselves, where people are coming in and saying, I don't know enough about Christianity to be offended by it? I mean, I don't know is the short answer. Possibly, but I simply don't know. I do think we're in a period where the gospel could be heard in a really fresh way. Okay, it's clear that people do not know what Christianity is and what its message is. It's getting lots of bad messages about Christianity. So let me go ahead and talk about, for just one more minute, what the church needs to grapple with going forward, and then we can try to answer some of your questions as best you can. I mean, I've read the book. I can say what I think Christian Smith is going to say and also what I'm willing to say, but I'd love to hear what you have to say. What the church needs to grapple with going forward, based on what Smith is presenting here. He's going to say, look, Americans understand themselves as consumers. And he says they consume spirituality as well. They consume religion as well. Now, as Christians, we're going to say that's not good to understand yourself first and foremost as a consumer. It's like, but we really need to grapple with that's where people are coming from and think about how do you move people from understanding themselves as consumers to understanding ourselves by what we do and love and build and worship, and that we are created in the image of God and what that means, right? It's going to be hard, okay? But on the other hand, you know, I haven't even had a chance to read this new encyclical on AI. That actually may be a real help as to how the church responds to this, because these same generations are extremely, extremely negative about AI. Even if they use it a lot, there are so many people in Gen Z and millennials who see this as an existential threat. And I think Pope Leo is taking the right tact to it and really focusing on, what makes us human. Okay, what makes us human here? And then let's talk about AI. So we need to understand that people understand themselves as consumers and move them from that. People are lonely and disconnected. Everybody recognizes this, okay? But the unwrapped community is neither obvious nor welcome, since preserving autonomy is such a big piece. We have to convince people that community does not kill every piece of your autonomy, okay? That community actually helps you become more human. Yeah, it helps you live out your humanity. Attracting people first through tradition, frankly, makes no sense. Okay. Introducing Jesus Christ through tradition or institution is like trying to sell ice cream in sub-zero weather. Okay, something that just people in Minnesota on this call, they're going to get. It's like, you don't sell ice cream when it's January. Well, in this culture, as much as we love our tradition, and I'm not negating it in the least, it's not what you lead with. Okay. You lead with Jesus Christ. Okay. And then we teach people, and they come to realize Jesus comes to teach them that he loves his church. Okay. And he loves the tradition, that he's helped inform, right? It needs to all be through Jesus Christ, or else we have nowhere to go. It's really true. And the cultural mismatch, honestly, it's huge. It's huge. So we really need to envision what church culture looks like for post-boomers. And I'll be honest, in most churches, I don't think they have grappled with that. I really don't, because if you look at people that are on pastoral councils, um, many of our priests, like, they are of that generation. And this is not to say anything negative about that generation. It's just that they really do tend to think with a somewhat different set of values. I'm at the very upper edge of Gen X. I really feel like I straddle these two uh, these two groups very well. Um, and it's a challenge. Okay, it's a challenge, but it's a challenge we can meet as long as we recognize the challenge itself, right? If we're not even aware that there's a challenge, there's no way to respond to it. So you all, thank you for letting me go over on this a little bit. It really is an interesting book, and it offers so much, but I'm really interested in what you think. And I'm going to go ahead and move to um, the stop share. And